Newsfirst, NEWSLINE with Faraz Shaukat Ali.
And a very good evening to you and a warm welcome to NEWSLINE Live. My guest this evening is almost predictable, especially because Sri Lanka, we're at it again. It's that time of year. We're back at the UN in Geneva. Lots of people are going there, lots of complaints, and our government of the day, whichever government of the day, is engaging in what appears to be a lot of waffle. Let's find out how much of it is really waffle and how much of it is perhaps factual and necessary. Our guest today, therefore, is very rather appropriate. Ms. Ambika Satkunanathan, former Human Rights Commissioner in Sri Lanka, and also an activist known to be bringing about human rights issues of a variety, of a huge variety in nature. Very good evening to you, Ms. Satkunanathan. Thank you very much for being on the program.
Good evening.
Now then, what on earth does our minister mean when he says that they will oppose any move to impose upon this country anything that is unconstitutional? Surely that's like an obvious thing, but why is he saying that?
I would say the minister is saying that, and he's referring to, I think he also referred to that in his at his press conference today. He's talking about external mechanisms, and I think he's probably referring to the Sri Lanka Accountability Project, which is an office that has been set up within the Office of the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights as part of the last Human Rights Council resolution. And the purpose of that mechanism or that office is to gather evidence, and with the purpose of using it at a future stage. So even if another country wants to use universal jurisdiction and file legal action against someone, they could turn to this mechanism to obtain evidence to support that process. So I think the minister is referring to that. Now the point is this: that is an external mechanism that was set up by the UN Human Rights Council resolution. It is not set up in Sri Lanka. It is set up within the Office of the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights. So therefore, the Constitution of Sri Lanka applies only within the borders of Sri Lanka. It does not apply to Switzerland, to Geneva, or to the UN Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights.
Why is our minister saying this?
I'm not sure why the minister is saying this, but perhaps to also preempt in the resolution that is coming up, because during the good governance Yahapalana regime, there was, there were promises made to set up a hybrid court, meaning that it would have judges, both Sri Lankan as well as foreign judges.
So that it isn't really allowed by our constitution.
Well, that is also not entirely correct, and there's a lot of writing and that has been done that says that that is also not exactly correct.
Right.
But right now we're not even talking about that. What exists at the moment is the Sri Lanka Accountability Project, which is an entity existing entirely outside the borders of Sri Lanka, and there is nothing that exists within the borders of Sri Lanka. But as I said, he's probably trying to preempt and to avoid something such as the establishment of a hybrid court being included in the any future resolution.
Where would this hybrid court be based?
No, it was in the previous resolution. The hybrid court was supposed to be based in Sri Lanka, and by hybrid what they meant was that it would have local as well as foreign judges. That is what it was meant by hybrid.
Sometimes it's very frustrating. 13 years after the end of hostilities, the people of the former conflict areas, that's just a name, former conflict areas, because it is as barren as it was, apart from the fact that with the passage of time, 13 years, remember, greenery has returned and so on. But it's almost like a painting, because beneath that greenery are hundreds of thousands of people who are still waiting for an explanation. Some people told me recently that that there were thousands who died here, during the last days and so on. But they can't find the bones. Really? And after so long, you can't find any bones? That's impossible to believe, with all the best of intentions. In Vietnam, despite everything, they found bones. And here they can't find any bones? The cleanup operation is still not complete, or it didn't appear to me to be complete, because I saw clothing, footwear, even an album, a photo album, blowing in the wind. It's sad that and at the end of the day, some form of closure surely is a must.
Well, I think it's like this. When we say closure, it is not up to me, it's not up to you, it's not up to the government or the minister to say we must have closure now. It is up to the people themselves, and for them, for them to feel at peace with themselves, because closure is also such a cruel, inhuman word in a sense. You're forcing them to forget. So for them to feel at peace somewhat, because some of them have lost everything. They've suffered such unimaginable losses. It is up to them to decide that, and for that to feel at peace, they also need to learn what happened to their family members. They need justice. They need accountability. So those responsible to be held accountable, and also reparations, because as you said, anyone traveling, you move away from the A9 and you go into Kilnurchi, you go into Mullaitivu, to the back, to the villages, then you find the poverty is stark. It's as if, it's not 13 years, it's just after the end of the war.
Absolutely.
And you can talk about roads, but it's pretty much just the A9. You go inside, some of it is very difficult terrain. And for them, they need truth, they need justice, they need reparations. Without that, I think they cannot feel at peace. So I would not use the word closure, because even, let's take for example the Office on Missing Persons. It appears that they are obsessed, or they're most concerned about closing the files. That is not the purpose of the office. The purpose of the office is to find out what happened to these people, to find out the truth, and because the families want to know.
But 13 years later, you've just told us that the UN are collecting data. 13 years later, when is this all going to come to an end? And when can we start the process of rebuilding trust and rebuilding people's lives that have been admittedly shattered? What can we do? What should be done? Rather than, they told me about the water. Apparently there's some form of contamination. Where are the samples that have been collected? Where's the results of that? Those are action rather than talk. When and what can be done?
Well, the when is entirely up to the government, isn't it? And what can be done? Well, a lot can be done. And what I say is that, you don't need to set up massive new institutions. There's a lot that can be done immediately. For instance, don't take over private land to expand military camps. Don't, the military shouldn't be running these massive farms which are subsidized by the state and which undercut the local farmers who are already suffering, who have barely begun to rebuild their lives after losing everything during the war. Don't use the PTA, repeal the PTA, don't arrest people on flimsy charges. We can go on and on about what can be done. And for instance, we've had in Sri Lanka's history, we've had so many commissions, right? We've had several presidential commissions on disappearances. We've had the Paranagama Commission, we've had the Udalagama Commission, we've had so many of them. And we have had the Lessons Learned and Reconciliation Commission. Now, these commissions, even some of the older commissions, you'd be surprised to see the number of progressive recommendations they have. But practically none of these recommendations have been implemented. You asked where should they start to build trust. You can start to build trust by implementing some of the recommendations of these commissions, the past commissions, because that will show the people that you are walking the talk, that it's not just words, but that you intend to follow it up with action.
Inasmuch as the Rajapakses are known for their inaction and sort of looking askance at these real issues, we have today a president who is in his past, who has been sort of at it in terms of trying to have accountability and so on. So today he is now the president. Do you think that, what are the chances for greater accountability and reconciliation?
Well, I don't think there are any chances for accountability and reconciliation, because the president has come to power. He was elected with the help of the party that is controlled by the Rajapakses, who stand accused of committing gross violations of human rights and humanitarian law. Since the president has come to power, although, you know, informally, supposedly they gave an undertaking not to use the PTA, what has happened is we've seen 3 of the protesters who are part of the Inter-University Students' Federation being detained on detention orders of 90 days under the PTA. Now, surely, I mean, how on earth are they related to any terrorist offenses? But once again, as we've said several times before, the PTA does not define terrorism, which is also very dangerous, because
it's also it's absolutely crazy that it's not. It's supposed to be dealing with terrorism.
But it does not, and all that it has, and as I've said several times before, it has offences that already exist in other laws, like, for instance, the Penal Code. But what the PTA does, it gives excessive powers to the police. It allows you to detain a person for up to 1 year without producing the person before the magistrate. It allows you to use a confession made to a police officer of a rank of assistant superintendent of police or above as evidence. So this is what creates room for torture. And also look at the way in which many of these people were, quote unquote, arrested without following due process. Now, the IGP issues certain guidelines on how arrests should be conducted, but literally, practically overnight, it seems that, you know, those guidelines or recommendations are ignored, and we see a violation of due process. Now, you talked about, you know, we can't exceed the Constitution, we can't violate it.
Yeah.
Of course we can't, but every day we see, you know, many people who are part of the state, part of government doing that, and none more so than the police, violating due process during arrest.
Is it me, or am I imagining things? But isn't there a greater presence of the military in the former conflict areas?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And anyone going there would see that the number of military camps, right? Large numbers of military camps that you see there. You see, even when there are protests happening, sometimes you see the military standing around taking photographs. There were also, you know, incidents of some media in the north, you know, with the military. We see them taking over private land, as I said, to expand military camps. They are running farms. Now, in which part of the country do they run these massive farms, which are also subsidized? So now, if the IMF is talking about cutting subsidies and the local farmers suffer and they don't receive subsidies, but you have the military running these camps and they are subsidized by the state, clearly they will undercut the local farmer who is already you know, suffering a lot. So if you're talking about reconciliation, we don't need a new Truth and Reconciliation Commission. There are, you know, hundreds of things that you can do literally overnight to create trust.
On that note, let's go for a quick break and take a peek at this evening's headline news from the News First primetime news team. We'll see you on the other side.
Newsfirst Newsline with Faraz Shaukat.
Inclement weather claims one life in Kurunegala. Warnings issued to refrain from setting out to sea for fishing activities. New party headed by Kumara Velgama launched. LP gas prices reduced. Human rights must be looked into domestically with no external interference, says Foreign Minister.
Newsfirst Newsline with Faraz Shaukat.
And welcome back to Newsline Live. I'm in conversation with Ms. Ambika Satkunanathan. Ms. Satkunanathan, tell me, why are there claims that the counter-terrorism bill is virtually the same or has lots of significant similarities as the Prevention of Terrorism Act?
I would actually say that the bill that we saw is, in a way, a different way, much worse than the Prevention of Terrorism Act. Yes, it is. Because, for instance, once again, there is the definition of terrorism in the counterterrorism bill is also very broad, which means it does not adhere to the elements that have been set out, particularly by the UN. Then the second thing is, in the Prevention of Terrorism Act, the military is not given, you know, law enforcement powers. The military is not naturally given powers to arrest, etc. Those powers you get only if a state of emergency is declared and emergency regulations are issued, or if the president uses Section 12 of the Public Security Ordinance and calls out the armed forces to maintain public order. So what this is doing, in a way, the counterterrorism bill was creating a de facto state of emergency without having to declare a state of emergency. And you're giving people who are not police personnel powers to arrest, like I think here, and they have 24 hours. They have to hand them over to the police only within 24 hours. So you're militarizing police. The DIG can request the assistance of the military. And some of the other things was any member of the armed forces, they can search any person, vehicle, vessel or train. And as I said, it allows the IGP to request the assistance of the armed forces to give.
So is the right, under this proposed bill, does the military have the right of arrest?
In this, it actually does. That's the problem here, because it does empower them, or at least what was in the public domain. I'm talking about what was in the public domain. We do not know whether they changed afterwards. I'm going by the bill that was gazetted that we saw, and it does. It gives them. So what it was doing, it was militarizing policing. And that is a problem. And even in the South, we have seen during what happened, right? During the Aragalaya, during those protests, particularly July 22nd, the violence that was unleashed, people saw, because the military is not trained in policing. Policing is about maintaining peace. It is about knowing how to de-escalate. It is not about using violence as your first option, but as your last resort. So the military is not trained. That is not their duty in a democracy, right? So even in the South, I hope that people have realized the huge problems with that. And this was, in a way, militarizing policing.
So how can we move forward?
How can we move forward in relation to which issues?
Look, let's ask it the way it is. Do we need a PTA? Do we need a counterterrorism act?
Well, many UN Security Council, resolutions require countries to have it, but that is also because states want more punitive laws. They want more powers. Now, for instance, and I'll take an example. We have the PTA, right? Now, if the PTA, you really, really needed it, Why didn't it help you prevent the Easter attacks? Why is it that we have seen so many people? There was a case just last week, right, where a person that two people they had arrested, under the PTA, they were acquitted by the, they were acquitted at the end of the trial, and the confessions, their case was mostly based on confessions obtained from them. They alleged that it was obtained under torture. Now, the confessions were rejected by the court. What does that tell you? It tells you that the police have not investigated it properly. That means that, probably the people who actually committed these offences are still out there. So the PTA also makes the police, in a sense, lackadaisical, because you know that you can get a confession and that it will be admissible and that you can file an indictment based on that. So you are not going to be as thorough in your investigations, which means that, you really haven't held those responsible accountable, right? So how has PTA helped us?
Indeed, how has the PTA helped us? 13 years later, Sri Lanka is still struggling. But honestly, do you feel, Ms. Satgunanathan, that there has been a committed and concerted effort on the part of various governments since the end of the hostilities to correct this situation?
Well, it's the Yahapalana government that came closest to it.
So that's from a people's perspective, from those people in the Vanni.
But it not enough. I said it came closest to it in comparison to the other. But it's barely enough, because at the end of the day, you have to look at those who are affected and ask, has it made a difference to their lives?
What are they hoping? Are they hoping that with the passage of time, like what's happened in the former no-fire zones, for example, from once barren land, it is now, it's very lush green, and trees are growing again, although you do see the tops of the palmyra and coconut trees without the tops. That's because of what happened during the war. Are they hoping that with the passage of time and with the natural sort of passing away of people of age and so on, that these will be forgotten, or will it only breed more resentment and hatred?
Well, both, I would say, because now let's not forget, and that's what I'm saying, let's not forget, we've had disappearances in the south during the JVP insurrections, when teenage boys were disappeared and they were killed, or no one knows what happened to them. Now, we have forgotten that. People don't talk about it as often. And also you find that many of their families, because the parents passed away, because their wives might have also become older and they cannot go searching, their children or their siblings really have gotten on with their lives. So there aren't many people demanding answers for what happened during the JVP insurrection, which is also quite horrific and which has been documented in many reports of several presidential commissions, right? So I think the hope here is that that same thing will happen. But at the same time, the difference here is that you also see the militarization, you see the surveillance, you see the harassment, you see the land takeover. So therefore, that when a community or a people, when they feel that they're second-class citizens, that the state that is supposed to protect their rights is instead violating it, that they cannot go to the state for a remedy, they're actually afraid of the state. What chances do you think are there for reconciliation?
So where is this all heading to?
Well,
years more of waiting?
Well, I think that is a question that we need to ask the government, and I think what we need to also say to the government is, you don't need to create, for instance, and particularly in a time when we have scarce economic resources, right? We are in dire straits. You do not have to spend our funds or even donor funds setting up yet another institution which can turn out to be yet another white elephant like a Truth and Reconciliation Commission, because the truth in a way is not hidden. The truth is out there in these reports, in memories and testimonies of people. It's just that we chose to ignore the truth. How about taking action on the truth that is already out there. All these things that I said, they could actually start doing that to show that they intend to resolve this issue. And also, they speak about truth and reconciliation, but what about accountability? What about accountability when a man who is accused of grave crimes is, Secretary to the Ministry of Defense? Can you expect people, in the former conflict areas, to have faith that this process will be different to the past, that at least this will give them answers?
That brings me to another point in what I call the irony of equity. On the one side, we have laws here, and in which past presidents are afforded various sort of facilities, including a home, and not until the surviving spouse is around. So it's not on first debt; it's on second debt. It's valid until then, and all this is all these benefits, of course, are footed by the public at large, by our treasury. Now then, on the other side, we have an elected president who made monumental blunders and then admitted it, but sort of too late, went away and has come back. Now here's the inequitable nature of this contract. Why should we pay when we had very little delivery? In fact, the delivery was the other way around. It was we the people suffered not only a double but several whammies thanks to those executive actions. So where is the equity?
But where is the accountability? And the problem with accountability is we don't have accountability in any way. It's not just in relation to wartime violations. It's also in relation to corruption. It's also in relation to politicians. Now, for instance, if you take the former president, he should be held accountable for the blunders he made, for the suffering. I mean, it's an entire country that you pushed into this grave economic crisis. If you did 1/1000th or 1/1,000,000th of that in your job, you might be actually fired. But here, what is happening during severe economic crisis is that he is being rewarded for it. You are using scarce public resources to provide all these benefits to him. Now, he is someone who has claimed that he sacrificed a lot for the country. Well, if you are such a patriot, then why are you accepting all this? Should you not, during such a time of economic crisis, give all this up, sacrifice this, as it were, for the benefit of the people who you claim you came to serve?
But, Ms. Satgunanathan, what's that saying? Patriotism is the last bastion of the scoundrel.
Yes, I think rather than patriotism, we need not just politicians but also citizens to be civic minded. I think it's about what is our civic duty, right? And that I think particularly Sri Lankan politicians really, they believe that impunity is their right.
And the Aragalaya has gone some way towards highlighting the need of the public to have more transparency, more accountable?
I think the Aragalaya has helped in that people do now feel that, we need to hold these people accountable. We should be asking questions. We need more transparency, and particularly corruption, because I think corruption has become endemic in Sri Lanka and so normalized. It has contributed to making people aware, but once again, not enough, because that is only in the urban areas. We need to also increase awareness all over the country.
Ambika Satgunanathan, thank you very much for being on Newsline Live. And tonight, ladies and gentlemen, straight after the news on Face the Nation with Shamir Rasuddin is the Governor of Sri Lanka's Central Bank, Dr. Nandalal Weerasinghe. And that is a show that you really want to watch. Take care, and God bless you all.